The United Nations General Assembly will vote tonight on whether to upgrade the Palestinians' status to non-member observer state. Although seen as largely symbolic, the change would allow the Palestinians to join UN agencies and bodies such as the International Criminal Court. The bid is strongly opposed by Israel and the United States. Well, I think we can cross to the United Nations in New York, where in a moment we're expecting the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to address the General Assembly. The resolution just being introduced at the moment, and that's the scene at the UN as we speak. When Mahmoud Abbas takes to the platform, we'll go there. In the meantime, let's speak to Douglas Murray, who's with us, the Associate Director at the Henry Jackson Society, a British-based think tank. Welcome. Thanks for coming in. What do you think of this move?
Well, it's obviously a sign of desperation on the part of Abbas. In recent weeks, obviously the attention of the world and of the region was for a period on the Hamas leadership in the Gaza and its waging of a war against Israel, which of course got huge international attention. Abbas has now returned to this idea he first tried last year at the UN of getting a non-member state status there. And it's really Abbas's attempt to put himself back into the leadership role that he desires to have, the head of the Palestinian peoples. Of course, that is a role which he has been challenged in recent years, in recent months, and this is his effort to get back.
The Palestinian ambassador to the UN is quoted as saying it's a very important step in trying to save the two-state solution, maybe the last time to save the two-state solution.
Yes, well, I mean, he would say that, wouldn't he?
But they would argue they've tried other methods, and that's come to nothing.
Yeah, the problem is that they have been invited again to the negotiating table by the Israeli government in recent days, exactly to avert this again, and again the Palestinian Authority has rejected that move. I think it's very important for people to realise that everybody wants a Palestinian state. The Israeli government wants there to be a two-state solution to this. But what we are seeing here is an attempt not to come to the negotiating table, to actually avoid negotiations with the Israelis, their only partners in this. And that is why this is such a controversial and problematic move. Stay
there for a moment, if you will, because as you can see now, we've got activity at the UN General Assembly. Mahmoud Abbas has just taken to the platform, and applause in some sections of the room. Not all, as you would imagine, but quite a few have got to their feet to applaud him before he makes his case. And as we were discussing, the vote is on upgrading the Palestinian state from observer entity to observer state. Let's listen in with a translation, we hope. So that's the case being made by the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in front of members of the United Nations General Assembly. A vote due later on this evening, our time, on upgrading the Palestinian status there from observer entity to observer state. Douglas Murray is still with me. Reaction briefly to what we've heard so far from the Palestinian President.
I'd say two things. First of all, of course, he talks about the Palestinians and the Palestinian state. There are, of course, already two Palestinian states, de facto states, both in the West Bank and, of course, in Gaza. And it's the fact that Mahmoud Abbas has no say on what happens in Gaza, has no control of the Hamas faction, which has brought him to the United Nations tonight. The second thing is, anybody who wonders why there is still no resolution to this conflict can see it there. Mahmoud Abbas is doing exactly what Yasser Arafat did before him, and denying history, denying the legitimacy of Israel's claim, and putting all of the blocks in place yet again that the Palestinians have put in place for many decades that have prevented what is not an easy, but at least a viable, visible solution from happening.
Trouble is, there are two versions of history here, aren't there? And you know perfectly well that if I had somebody sitting here who backed him, he would tell the historical story a different way.
My simple point would be that the Israelis have asked him to come to the negotiating table to talk about final status solutions. Once again, Mahmoud Abbas has refused to do that. Once again, he has instead gone to the UN stage to rewrite history,
which
and to deny, and of course, to deny to deny the legitimate security claims of Israel. After all, those children he was talking about in the Gaza were not killed by Israel for sheer joy or pleasure. They were killed because Hamas, a terrorist group, launched rockets against Israel. Israel responded to them, and Hamas, unfortunately, instead of building bunkers for its people, like the Israelis do, tends to use its people as a human shield.
Well, that's clearly another contested point. Let's deal with the UK position. They may abstain on this. What do you think of that?
Well, the reason why a number of European states are voting for and or abstaining this time, as opposed to last time, when there was far more opposition to this, is really because Mahmoud Abbas has spent recent days making it very clear to foreign ministers in Europe that in his view, if he doesn't get this through, he's a dead duck. And in his interpretation of this, he is the only moderating force holding back Hamas. And his claim is, of course, is that if Britain and other states don't back him, or at least don't abstain and refrain from voting against him, he will have his, effectively, legs cut off. That's his claim. The simple point I'd make on this is that the only way in which this conflict can be resolved and solved, finally, which is what everybody wants, is for the two main parties, the Israelis and the Palestinians, to be able to sit down, for the Israelis and Palestinians to have a viable negotiating partner. At the moment, the Palestinians are split into Hamas and the PA, and they refuse to come to the table.
Okay. We must leave it for the time being, but we'll obviously return to that vote when it happens. Douglas Murray, thanks very much indeed.